Hi, everyone. This is Julie Beam, the Executive Director of the Attachment and Trauma Network, and we're back here today for another interview with the Educating Traumatized Children Summit, the online gathering of expert voices in how to provide trauma-sensitive school experiences for our children. This summit has been brought to you by the Attachment and Trauma Network, known as ATN, and we're pleased today to be talking to Bob Burroughs, who's the head of school at CALO. It's an attachment-focused residential treatment center, and he's here today to talk to us about how they do school there and the lessons that we can learn. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
So let me tell you a little bit about Bob before we get started. He's a retired professor of education at the University of Cincinnati, where he taught teachers for 15 years. Much of his life has been involved in education. He started his career by teaching English in high school at both public and private schools in California and Connecticut. For several years, he worked as an editor for the educational publisher of Scholastic in New York City. And most recently, he was a principal in an educational consulting firm that was called Burroughs, also located in Cincinnati. As an educational consultant, Bob's worked with more than 100 families, helping to evaluate residential treatment placements and monitoring the students' progress in those facilities. He holds a Ph.D. from the State University in New York at Albany, a master's degree from the University of Connecticut, and a bachelor's from the University of California in Santa Barbara. He's also the father to two boys who were adopted 26 and 24 years ago from Bogota, Colombia. So he's got experience in education and experience in adopting. So, Bob, start by telling us a little bit about CALO, about CALO's model, and how your academic program fits into their model.
Sure. Well, at CALO, we summarize our treatment model as CASA, C-A-S-A, which stands for Commitment, Acceptance, Secure, and Attune. Because this is the foundation of really all that we do here, I'd like to go through it with you just step by step. So we begin with commitment on the caregiver's part. For us, that is usually the parent, the guardian, or whatever primary attachment figure commits to sending their child to us and commits to working with us through the treatment, with the goal being to reunite the family. But it also begins with our own commitment as caregivers to treat the child, to go the distance, as we say here. That commitment needs to be coupled with acceptance. Acceptance by the parent and by us can be a complicated process, as you can well imagine. But at its fundamental level, it's a recognition that developmental trauma and attachment is driving the child's behavior, not attitudes or laziness or narcissism or any of the other labels that we slap on kids.
That's a huge one for parents and for all adults to recognize that it's not the behavior that's driving, it's what's underneath that's driving.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And so we have to accept that it's not a matter of just trying harder for our kids, but of learning how to trust others and then ultimately themselves. So once our kids feel accepted, they can begin to feel secure or safe, both physically and emotionally. With that feeling of safety, they can begin to attune with us and begin a relationship. That's really important because as humans, we learn just about everything about ourselves and the world around us through relationships. We learn how to speak our language, how to regulate our emotions, how to get along with others, how to tie our shoes, really everything. I've made this seem more linear in theory than it is in practice, of course. In action, this tends to be a recursive process. In other words, we do it over and over again, rather than a straight line of progress. Well, so this ends up being important in school as well. In general, our students don't trust teachers, so we have to commit and accept them before they can feel intellectually or emotionally safe in a classroom. As they begin to feel secure, they can begin to develop relationships with us and begin to learn. Interestingly, this process really is not fundamentally different from some of the current theories in contemporary educational thought. As you mentioned, I was a university professor, and we talked a lot about the Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who stressed the interdependent nature of education and the whole social basis of learning, unlike Piaget, who seemed to stress the unfolding of stages within individuals. I actually think Piaget didn't really advocate that, but as American educators, we seem to take that from him, perhaps because, we stress individualism here. But anyway, with our students, it's easier to see how relationship and the social basis of learning is so important. So in essence, that's kind of, what we do at CALO and how school fits in.
Right. So you're really looking at it from the social learning model that I think some of our other interviewees are going to touch on that too, which is that relationship is the driving force behind the child's ability and readiness to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So by the time the students get to you, they, in most cases, have had a lot of trouble in a typical traditional school setting, correct?
Absolutely.
And many of them qualify for IEPs or special education and have learning challenges as well as emotional disorders. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you address all of that?
Yes. I would say just about every student here has struggled in school, and currently we have 75. About 40% of our students have IEPs when they enroll with us, and most of them certainly could qualify for an IEP. Some kids come to us from private schools where IEPs aren't an issue. But just about every student at some time here has trouble regulating their emotions enough to attend class or to stay in class. So most of our students could qualify for IEPs with an emotional disturbance. But we also see the full range of learning issues and learning disabilities: ADHD, auditory processing, some spectrum stuff, language-based disabilities. And we know that, adopted kids typically have learning disability diagnoses at a greater frequency than the population as a whole. So we aren't particularly surprised by this. But my own observation through the years as an academic director and consultant and father of adoptive boys who struggled in school is that adoptive kids' heightened sensitivities and heightened anxieties in general are often magnified in a school classroom.
Okay.
The hypervigilance that they have can actually look a lot like ADHD or other learning issues. So to the extent that we can soothe those fears and anxieties through trusting relationships, we can help with some of those learning issues. I mean, certainly kids come to us with learning issues, but I also believe that some of it is the trauma that school has in some ways reinforced with them. Can you give teachers some ideas, the teachers that are listening to this? The first thing I wanted to point out to the audience that's listening to this is that CALO's attachment-focused residential treatment program has primarily children that are adopted or are coming through foster care. Is that correct? Yes, 95% of the 75 students are adopted, and so either from the foster care system or foreign adoptions or domestic adoptions. So your microcosm, the world that you're dealing with, are kids that more than likely have come with a pretty significant background of trauma and attachment problems, obviously from their early beginnings. And so you're seeing the anxiety and the hypervigilance
um, full
Absolutely.
bore.
Yeah, absolutely. We
Right.
sometimes see the hoarding of food, all of the sort of symptoms that that you might see in a child with developmental trauma.
Right. Right. Well, and at KALO, the focus, obviously, the reason that the parents, the caregivers, have put the children in KALO, have sought the placement there, is for the treatment first, is for assistance in helping them to overcome the trauma, to establish attachments, those types of things. So with the focus on treatment first, where and how does the school and the academics fall into that priority?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. Treatment is the priority at KALO, and treatment takes many different forms. We have a very active canine program here where kids can actually adopt a golden retriever and take it home with them. And they learn through that process how to have a relationship with a dog, which can then be transferred to peers or adults. We have an adventure therapy program. And then we also have school. And students spend about 5 hours a day in school-related activities. 4 of those hours, 4 days a week, are spent in actual classrooms with peers in small numbers, usually 6 to 8 kids a class. Some of the other activities during the day, such as working with the canines or group therapy or adventure therapy, also provide some academic credit. So that represents a number of hours, but certainly not the majority of hours. But just as in treatment, we focus on trusting relationships in schools, and school provides another venue in which students can experience those relationships. So when our teachers work with students, the relationship is really the basis of their work. Our first priority is establishing that relationship. As I tell my teachers, it's not about the content of the curriculum, but the content of the relationship. So, school becomes just another venue that we seek to provide experiences that are repetitive, relational, rhythmic, relevant, and rewarding, as Dr. Bruce Perry says.
Can you repeat those for our audience real quick? Because some of our audience may be hearing that for the first time.
Sure. With developmental trauma, what we're trying to do is, in many ways, sort of rewire the brain. And Dr. Bruce Perry talks about this process as with experiences that are repetitive, relational, rhythmic, relevant, and rewarding.
Great.
So that's with the relationship as the basis, that's what we're trying to do. But because our students often have had such deep difficulty with school, providing those 5 R's is effective. We can do that, but it's not efficient. And it's messy as students struggle to connect with one another and with teachers. Unfortunately, public education seeks efficiency. So that's one of the, and we're very clear that we can be effective, but we're not efficient. So let me just illustrate with one student as a kind of case study how this messy process might look. So this is a story about a student that we can call Fred. Fred came to us to KALO in a wheelchair following an accident that he had had. He'd been to a number of schools, some of them boarding schools, where he'd not done well. He was adopted from Russia at 7, so he had some language and processing issues. But mostly, he just had a deep distrust of teachers. So even though he spent his first 10 weeks with us in a wheelchair, we could not physically roll him into a classroom. He would resist us with all of his considerable upper body strength to push himself back from the classroom door. That's how desperately he did not want to be in a classroom. So we didn't force him to go into the classroom. But while he was refusing school, he was also developing a relationship with one of our coaches or the direct care staff who works with students throughout the day, even when they come up to school. So I invited Fred and this coach that he was developing a relationship with into my office and proposed that the coach help Fred one-on-one with his assignments for just one class. And Fred chose science because he liked the subject matter, and he worked with the coach for just that one class, one-on-one. The teacher worked with Fred to produce some PowerPoints as a kind of assessment piece because Fred liked PowerPoints. And so after a few weeks of Fred working one-on-one with a coach, we asked if Fred could go to the science class with the coach and sit in the class. Again, just once, just one class, you know. So Fred agreed, and we slowly moved him into some other classes. And finally, he got into all of his, 6 classes. So after just about a year now, Fred is attending all of his classes and getting passing grades. Well, you can see that that's not particularly efficient. Right? Yet about 5 months ago, when Fred had just started to go to all of his classes, his mother came to visit him at Kalo. And when we laid out sample of Fred's work for her, she broke down in tears. She hadn't seen him do this much work in years. So for her, this looked effective, and it looked like success. So why was it effective? I think it was effective because we committed to helping Fred become more comfortable with school, even when he didn't want to have anything to do with it. We accepted his fear and anxiety about school. And we made it safe for him by shrinking down the task. Let's not attack everything. And giving him a safe relationship to work within. And then finally, we attuned with him and guided him to other experiences when he was ready for them. So, you know, we used our model to work with him. And the more he does it, the more rhythmic, repetitive, relevant, all those things come to him.
And that helps him both gain the academics and really build the trust and the self-confidence, the self-trust that he can do these things.
Yes. Now, does he still occasionally have problems? Of course he does. You know, but he's now able to be in a classroom, whereas before he wasn't. So for us, that's huge progress, and for his parents,
that is huge.
That's huge.
Yes, that's huge progress all the way around. There's a lot. There's so much in that lesson and that example to learn. First of all, it's a fantastic example of your model and how you break down your model. It's a fantastic example to teach teachers what it takes to build that trust and relationship. And you're right, it is very effective, but it's not overly efficient. And there are probably a million programs where it's going to be hard to implement something that inefficient. So what it points out to parents then, and to folks that are thinking about how do we reach these children, is the level of effort and also the level of maybe shifting your expectations and your paradigm when it comes to education and academics versus the social emotional piece of things. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean we think about that as sort of what counts as success here for many of our students. And certainly for many of our parents, this really is the crucial question, is what does success look like for kids with attachment disorder? And so many of the parents that I talk to as they are enrolling here at Kalo are just exhausted with school. The marathon homework sessions, the endless calls from school administrators, the up and down grades, the tears, the school refusal. I mean, they're just worn out by it. I mean, not only that, but so many of them have, what I call run the gamut of emotions from hope to despair concerning school, that by the time they reach us, they speak of school success really in very modest terms. Learning how to behave in a classroom, getting a high school diploma, or learning how to count money and live independently are all markers of success the parents have given me. Right? So when it comes to that question of what does success look like, I mean, the real question is, well, it varies. It varies by kids. But I think, again, we can look at our model to help parents and to help answer, some of this question. And I have to start with acceptance as being a huge part of the answer. If we accept that our students, your children, are really trying their hardest, then we can take our clues about success from them. Because as they begin to feel safe and to build relationships, they'll begin to tell us what they want, and we will begin to see what their strengths are, just as Jackson began to tell us, let's start with science. So many of our students have interests and aptitudes for hands-on experiences that colleges may not fit their talents, but maybe vocational programs might.
Right.
So as parents, and I'm really speaking about myself because my wife and I struggled with this also. It's often very difficult for us as parents to really see the child that's in front of us. We're tempted to see our hopes, our fears, our expectations, our projections, anything but the child itself.
Right.
And my own feeling is that many adoptive parents have been traumatized themselves through the adoption process and so put more emphasis on school because it's something they understand. We all went to school. And more times than not, they were fairly good at school themselves. And so ultimately, for some, it's easier to focus on what you know and think you can control than on the messy reality of developmental trauma.
Right, and
but in fact,
the relationships, yes.
Yeah. But in fact, parents find out they can't control it, So for most kids with attachment disorder, I think school success looks something like this. Can I be in a classroom without jumping out of my skin? When kids can reach that goal, then they have lots of further school-based or training-based options. And I think that's what we're trying to give them as options. But until they have more or less that ability to be in a classroom, school will always be a place of further traumatization. And of course, that's why the relationship is so important, because we don't want to further traumatize them.
Right. What valuable insight, and I think it's very important, for parents to think that through, what their expectation is. I think it's hard to buck the societal expectation. I know we educate my daughter in a different model than the traditional public school, and I get some pushback from friends, acquaintances, just the community in general about, well, why isn't she, doing what everybody else does? And the expectation is there, from our extended family, from everybody. And like you, I went into education originally and have degrees in that and had high expectations and would love for my child to have fit that typical model. But it was a hard point to get to the acceptance of, in order to give her what what she needs, we needed to turn that on its head and not look at it and solely in terms of an academic success, but start looking at it in that social emotional relationship realm.
Yes.
And it's hard to get there. I mean, it's hard for parents to get there and for educators to get there too.
Yes, it is very hard to get there because of our hopes and dreams. And I think as adoptive parents, how much you've gone through to just get the child to begin with,
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's really hard.
So talk to the educators that are listening to us at this point a little bit about what they could do in whatever situation that they're currently working in to build trust relationships, to look towards a model that is more social and emotional in context. Do you have some points or ideas for them? Even if they need to maintain the efficiency of their program, is there something that they can do to be more relational?
Well, I think listening is really key. I think at times as teachers we're in charge in the classroom, and so we want control, and sometimes we need that control to keep kids safe. But our traumatized children also like control, and it's very easy to end up getting into power struggles with these kids. So one thing is providing choices to kids, both in terms of what they're going to study, how they're going to study it, how they might demonstrate their knowledge that they've gained from it. Giving lots of choices can be helpful with these kids. We also, I mentioned earlier, listening to them, and in that story with Fred, it was really important, and a lot of my discussion with him preceded, that let's do with science, with conversations, really just listening to him about what, if anything, about school do you like, and he hit on science. So really trying to play to the child's strengths rather than to the child's weakness helps, because it gives them that sense that you are accepting them, that you are listening to them, because they don't feel, many of them have had histories where they didn't feel adults did listen to them, and in fact adults either neglected them or adults abused them. And unfortunately, parents and teachers get that baggage, they bring that with them. Right. And you have to be aware of that. One of the things we talk about here at CALO are, core beliefs. And many of our kids, because of the developmental trauma that they have core beliefs like, the world is an unsafe place, or I'm a flawed human being. And so when they come into school, they carry those core beliefs with them. And we hear regularly, kids say, well, I'm just stupid. I can't get this, and that's why they don't ask for help, because it's not going to do any good, and that's why they're reluctant to try in school, because, well, I'm going to spend all this time, and it's still not going to work out because I'm stupid,
Right. Exactly.
So being conscious as a teacher that you want to play to their strengths and try to build on successes is much more important than trying to, let's remediate their weaknesses first. because that's just going to drive them deeper into the shame that they feel about school.
Right. That is fantastic advice. I know from coaching and training parents that's one of the things that we tell them too, is to find the positives and play to those strengths and ignore as much of the weakness as you can that it's safe to ignore, because you want to change that worldview. At the same time, let me ask you if you think teachers also might do what parents sometimes do, and that is, in an effort to make the child feel better about that negative worldview, when the child says things like I'm stupid, or this is too hard, or I can't do it, or I give up, or whatever negative beliefs that they vocalize, I know that a lot of times parents, and I'm guessing teachers would too, would hop in really quickly, almost setting up an argument. No, you're not stupid. No, don't, and that's not necessarily the best way to approach that either.
It's not, because we talk here about core beliefs as like gravity, all of us believe in gravity because we experience gravity. So if I'm going to make an argument to you about gravity, you're not even going to listen to it, because you're going to say,
right.
No, not,
Yeah,
and so, right. And they're the same way about their own beliefs. So to challenge those beliefs with words, it has the opposite effect, kind of drives them deeper back, because it makes them think, God, this person's stupid, it's like they're arguing there is no gravity. Of course I'm stupid. I know I'm stupid. I've had experiences that have shown me I am stupid, So the pushback with the words is often ineffective. And that's why the relationship is so important, because when they say that, a lot of what we try to do as teachers is sometimes explore that with them, but most of the time we leave that to the therapist, and just kind of help them sit with those feelings, to be there with them as they have those feelings, to be empathetic with them rather than to try to convince them they're not having those feelings.
Or problem solve for them out of that. I know a lot of times teachers, because they want to make things better, just like when parents want to make things better, try to hop in and rescue or hop in and change things, where when you say, I think you said something really valuable, you sit there. You just sit there and be present with them, acknowledge what it is they're thinking and feeling, but not solve their problem for them, basically.
Yeah. And that's hard to do too, because as parents, we don't want our children to be in pain, and when we're teachers, we don't want them to be in pain.
Right.
But most of the time, that's the best response.
Right. But then there are clever ways, and I know you probably know a gazillion of them, to play to their strengths and let them have those successes, and then be able to point that out in a way that doesn't clash so heavily with their worldview that it that it sends them into that negative thought pattern, so that it's almost like chiseling away at a piece of granite or something to change that belief.
That's a great image. I like that image, because that is what happens, and that's why it takes such a long time, and why it's messy, because we might chip off a little bit of that one day, and the next day they'll come in and try to put that piece back on, and that's just.
I'm thinking about it, putting it back on. Get out there, super glue. Nope, I am bad. I do have a negative view of myself. It happens daily. So, Bob, in recap and summary, can you, if you are a teacher out there listening to this recording today, what are the takeaways that you would want that educator, that teacher, to be thinking about from the model that you all have?
Well, I guess I would start by saying that, developmental trauma and the, attachment issues, disorganized attachment that's created in a lack of relationship, which is to say abuse, neglect, or inconsistency, can really, we believe, only be treated in relationship. So that's the primary thing. It's that creation of a trusting relationship with teachers or parents that will treat the trauma and rebuild the attachment. So that's where teachers have to focus,
Right.
I believe. It's messy, it's inefficient, but it can work. And, perhaps some ways of doing that are what I would call pruning the task, so it's more emotionally manageable, as we did with Fred, or spending more time on building relationships than on content. We've just hired a new math teacher, and I was talking with her yesterday. She was going through the book about, I've got to get this, this, and this. I said, no, you don't. No, don't think about scope and sequence. What's more important is to think about your kids. Learn about your kids. Learn what they need. What are their strengths? How can you engage them and get them into a relationship? Then we'll worry about, whether they need to know right angles or the rest of that, Or perhaps it's listening. Just listening more to our students' fears or anxieties, before plunging into the schoolwork. I think we just really rush. School in general is about time's chariot hurrying near. The word curriculum actually comes from Latin for course, which is a race course. And that's what we think school is this race.
Right. It's what it feels like a lot of times.
Yeah, and for some kids that's okay, but for our traumatized kids that's not okay. That's not going to work.
Right.
So, the more teachers can slow down and the more they can listen to kids, if possible, actually have fun with kids,
which is why they got into teaching to begin with, most of them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, really, I guess I often, when I talk to parents, I sum it up by saying that we kind of have to, in school, approach our students the way Hippocrates approached his physicians, which is first do no harm. Don't make the trauma worse.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Bob, this has been a very enlightening interview. I very much appreciate you laying out the CASA model that you use there at Kalo and driving the point home with a great example of Fred. And we wish Fred continued success in the classroom there at Kalo. That's a great story. And very much appreciate everything that you've had to say, both to teachers and parents today, about the importance of building relationships.
Well, I hope it's been helpful.
It most certainly has. So I know that everyone here appreciated hearing from Bob today. This is Julie Beam with the Attachment and Trauma Network, speaking from the Traumatized Children Summit. This is one of the 20, actually closer to 24 interviews that will be airing with this summit. If you have not caught all of the interviews or you would like a complete set so that you can listen to these recordings anytime, they will be available along with transcripts. You can visit our website to purchase them, and they'll be downloadable at the end of this summit. You can get more information at this URL, www.attachU.org/events/summit. Bob, do you know off the top of your head, we'll make sure that we post it on the web page, what Kalo's URL is so that so that people can find out more about CALO?
Yes, it's www.calo, C-A-L-O, teens, TEENS.com.
Great, and I encourage you all to look at that too as a fantastic attachment-focused residential resource for teens and soon for preteens as well. Yes?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. So at the Attachment and Trauma Network, we're committed to helping traumatized children and their families. If you want to learn more about the Attachment and Trauma Network in specific, you can visit us at www.attachtrauma.org. So thank you all for tuning in today, and please continue joining us for other interviews. Bye-bye.